All right. Good evening, everyone. I am chairing until Chair Lebo is able to get into the City Hall. So for the moment, I'm going to call the meeting to order. The Thursday, October 16th Budget and Finance Committee meeting at 6:01. Do I hear a motion for adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Second, anyone?
John, thumbs up.
John's thumb.
Okay.
John's got the second.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, so we're
Right.
gonna move right through. We're gonna do hear from Director Vaughn. I know, I'm just thinking Lindsay. I'm just very casual tonight. On your September director's report, so take it away.
Thank you. So we're gonna go over the dashboard for September. Just remember that this is a two-year budget that we're looking at. So it goes September, it's at 37.5% is our target. That triggers it from, if it's under that, it's green, versus over that, then it goes into yellow for our operating departments, just meaning that it's an area of watch. So then walking down again, probably this is just going to be a repeat of some previous meetings. Civil Service Commission, that is directly tied to the level of amount of police hiring we've been doing, which there has been, as council's been very aware of, retirements, people leaving for other opportunities, and then a lot of hiring in. And so that will be addressed likely during the mid-buy. Then walking down Crime Watch, that is just a small amount of the general fund budget. And that was due to purchasing supplies that hit the budget early on in the 2025 fiscal year. Dispatch, that one probably isn't going to trend perfectly on the operating side, because we are always going to pay for a quarter ahead of time. So if we've already paid for third quarter, looking to pay fourth quarter.
One more for you.
I was just,
We're getting a little feedback. John, could you mute yourselves, please?
okay. I just was pausing because I wasn't sure.
I think it was just feedback.
Okay, sorry about
Please
that.
continue.
So then dispatch, that's again gonna be, fourth quarter, third and fourth quarter paid. The engineer operations, that is including some transfers, so that's a little higher at this point. And then the executive department, that is due to professional services due to multiple negotiations.
All right, guys, here's the walking man.
Here
Here we go.
that have taken place this year, and we will that will also be part of the budget amendment. So then the facilities, that is almost at 15%,
Good, Josie, keep it going.
and that is
Snake is a middle school thing.
We're getting a lot of data from you. Awesome, thank you.
So the facilities, that is due to earlier this year, we had quite a few building issues that council has been brought up to speed on, that were pretty much health and safety, had to address them urgently, definitely unplanned, and had to react very quickly to get them resolved. So with that being said, we will that will also be on the mid-biennial budget adjustment. Going down to planning, that actually is technically in the yellow. However, that is including the grants. There's a $500,000 climate element grant, and so that is heavy this year, and so that's what's driving that to look basically like we're over expending or expending at a higher pace within that. Police, very easy conversation. It's overtime pass through from third parties We did not anticipate and budget that accurately, which is a great thing, because it's more revenue in. We just need to expand the budget, both sides on the revenue and then the expenditure side, and we will address that during the mid-buy. And then everything else is within the green. And I'm going to stop there to ask if there are any questions or if everybody's okay with me just continuing down. I just want to make sure, okay, that
I
I've
think we're good.
pause for questions. Okay, so if we walk down to the non-operating departments, the audit, as you can see, some of those invoices have started coming in. The community programs, that's at 31%. Elections, that's an annual that we pay. Emergency management, same deal. It's an annual, and that's for our NEMCO. And then the lakefront property, again, that doesn't quite track on the operating department, and that's at 63%. The memberships, most of those are annual memberships, so that's not gonna track. That's gonna be, that's on target. Police technology is at 9% and public health is at percent.
Just a question about, so emergency management, it's a contract type situation and we get annual. Is there a reason it's not at 50%? Is there a reason it's a little over?
I would have to,
Okay.
I would have to actually look to get you if there's something else. It's mainly emergency management and there are some other costs in there.
Okay,
I would have to look to see the detail on that, but I can definitely look into it and get back to you.
thanks. Just good to understand what's in there.
And then the just revenue by fund, walking over to the next one, the capital improvement fund at 34%. And that is tied, basically, that's the real estate excise tax, REIT 1. And then the general fund revenue is at 36%. That's just right under the amount. And the second wave of property tax is going to be coming in. So again, that's the conversation that goes with the general fund in addition to the surface water fund, because those are tied together. So right in this October, you're going to start to see, versus October, November timeframe, you're going to start to see those swing up. And then the sewer utility, 37%, that's really close. And then if you tie that back to the sewer, the operating costs, it's at 37%. So that doesn't cause concern for me in my mind at this point. And then the street fund revenue, that's at 38%, just barely over. And that's, mainly due to there are some things that are trending low within that, coming in that fund. And we do transfer some money from the general fund into the street fund for the street light revenue. So to support that. So then surface water, again, that follows the property tax. And then the transportation capital, that's so low at 14% because it's basically based on our big roundabout project. So the big the WASDOT grant, the Transportation Improvement Board grants, and that just hasn't quite we haven't gone into construction yet. So let me be careful how I say that. We've adopted, approved the project, and we just haven't walked into construction yet. And so that will be, once that is in construction, you will start to see the revenue from the reimbursement of that to go up.
Did we skip the traffic safety fund?
Yes, we did.
Would you like to hit that one?
So the traffic safety fund is at 28%, and I will tell you that I was under the anticipation that it was trending low, but after looking at last month's numbers, I'm just gonna say this is note for pause. I think the numbers that the city was anticipating are starting to materialize. And so I think this is definitely one of those where we just didn't have, this was a guess. This was a very, without any data backup, because in the fourth quarter is when we went live in 2024 with these numbers. But I think even though this one is showing at 28%, I would definitely be very careful with having too much of a conversation of an area of concern until we can maybe even watch to see what it does through the end of this year. So, just, and that's just recent information.
Mayor has a question.
Yeah, unless council members want to please go first. Yeah,
Thank
just on point, I mean, the numbers last month were over $500,000, which were startling. And again, the expenditures from this fund are discretionary until they're committed to, for example, roundabout debt service, et cetera. And it's important to recognize that any trend downwards in this, in the traffic safety fund generally is a positive thing unless it goes below a certain threshold, and we'll accommodate those needs for the expenditures. But it's something that's very nebulous, and we'll see where it goes. I really fervently hope that, we've all talked about this before, really hope that we don't see increased numbers, but at the same time, if people are going to behave badly, they can pay for our roads and sidewalks and crosswalks and roundabouts and stuff. So thank you, Vice Chair.
Yes, could you remind us, please, in which fund does the new solid waste fee that we're collecting from Republic, what fund does that go into?
General.
And is that being collected on pace as we expected?
I will have to look at that specifically. My anticipation is yes, because it was a pretty straightforward number, and they are actually the ones that gave it to us. We didn't project that number. It was supplied by Republic with their data information. So, but I will double check and circle back with you on
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
Any questions from those online? One has materialized. Okay. John, do we want to let you settle or move on? We just finished revenue by fund. Okay. Are we gonna go over capital today? Or do we have another?
I just have to laugh at Tableau because I'm like, at least it has a sense of humor. I'm just gonna say, and we can't figure it out. We cannot figure out why it only wants to show you the ones that don't seem to have a lot of activity, and not the ones that actually do. So I'm just gonna chalk that up to Tableau has a sense of humor. However, I will say that all the numbers with the capital projects are on the backside, so please pay attention to that, and not the front as far as the capital as just the overview. And again, we aren't giving up on that to try to figure out why it's doing what it's doing and to be able to show everything. However, it's not working properly right now. We acknowledge that, and continue to just ask you to look at the actual numbers. So walking down, and again, all of the numbers, the hard numbers are on the backside of the Tableau report. So if you're looking for the actual numbers, they're all on the back with the percentages. And then walking down to the revenue by line item, we have the business tax at 45%. Construction permits are coming in strong. The motor vehicle excise tax, or also referred to as the gas tax, and that's in the street fund, is coming in at 35%. The mechanical and plumbing permits are at 47%. The passport revenue is at 47%. The real estate excise tax 1 and 2 is trending at 47%. And that goes into our capital improvement, and then our transportation capital. REIT 1 goes into capital improvement. REIT 2 goes into the transportation capital fund. The sales and use tax is at 41%, and the traffic safety camera revenue is at 29%. percent. And this is the one that is referring to the general fund traffic safety camera, not the actual fund, not the 002 fund. So that is so we have our school zones, red lights, and that's what this 29% is directed to.
Thank you. Any questions about revenue by line item? John, did you wanna
Right,
take over?
you can keep going if you like.
All right, what's next?
That pretty much concludes my overview of the.
I did
Yeah.
have a comment about the capital, looking at the numbers on the back, for capital projects, and the material bin covers. Are high, and is that because we haven't made the adjustment due to the extra construction we had to do for the footings and things like that?
Yes, there was a budget amendment that has
It's
come.
coming.
It actually was on the budget amendment that was presented earlier that will continue forward. To be discussed during the mid-buy.
Okay.
So yes, we are aware of the material bin covers, and we're proposing an amendment on that project previously. Do you have any more to add to that? Or is that? That's pretty much what I have.
Material bin.
Yeah. Okay.
Of course.
Question on that, so am I to understand that the delta here between the 213 and 394 was that design construction or construction service that you changed to? And if a change was more than $50,000, does that come to the council for approval?
It does, it was like, Kurt Paul mentioned, this was brought to you as part of the budget amendment for the mid-buy. The value is such the council has to prove it. It was wrapped up in the soils that had to be tested, delays of the project. And then the trash dump that was found underneath it had to be overexed. And Newfield brought in.
Was there any single change order greater than $50,000, which would require council approval before execution?
I do not know the answer to that question off the top of my head, but I can find out.
I'm just trying to see if
Director
there was
Dickinson.
Not a word.
We can circle back, sorry.
And then the cost date, the PTD, that represents the cost for the biennium, right? Not the total cost for the element.
Paid to date.
Okay, paid to date, so
Paid to date, year to date, paid to date, so that's a 2-date number.
because you have period to date, and I didn't know whether that was just the cost associated with 25-26, or if that was paid to date, meaning it represents.
Actual,
Okay, so the reference to period to date up here in the top is quite
year
right,
to date, it's,
meaning this is the total cost paid to
Mhm.
date as opposed to the cost paid in the
Sheeting through December of this year.
Okay, and
that
then,
is correct.
okay, and then the roundabout, the budget for the design, it was, my recollection was just under $1,050,000. Where's that? Because our total budget for that is 8.6 million.
Yeah.
So we
I
just
get
might
that.
clean up, that we're using PTD meaning two different things. That's all. It means both period to date, which represents the biennium, but on the capital side, what I hear you saying is it's the total paid.
No, not total paid within the fiscal year,
Okay,
within 2025.
okay.
So not the
So-
biennium,
so-
obviously, but just
So these
2025.
so these represent biennial budgets as opposed to project budgets.
Correct.
On capital, it's always good to show the total project value, because otherwise it can be misinterpreted that the project budget is some value that's less than the total, because you're only reflecting that which is in the biennium. So, for example, the roundabout design and the roundabout design budget That's the biennial budget, but it's not the total budget, because the total budget for the design is about 1.05 million. Right, so.
Yeah. That is correct.
It's a bit misleading. Because I'm fine if you want to show what was paid during the biennium, but it's always good to show what your total project is, budget on capital side, because capital always extends.
Maybe,
Not always, it often extends beyond a biennium. So it's kind of misleading to reflect people.
maybe we could come up with a third column. That says, I'm not sure yet, that I'll have to think this through and maybe have some brainstorming. However, we can have the 2025 number and then what is paid to date on the project, which would be previous fiscal years. Because design for the roundabout has not, I can't even say it's just 2024.
Right.
Because it's a bigger piece than that, so I'm not sure how to exactly walk that through. And I definitely would want to put my head together with Director Dickinson to make sure that we are between this report, between just everything that we're working together.
Okay.
I understand. You don't want them to conflict
Yeah,
usually or, Mayor.
Yeah,
comment.
great comments. I think we're in a place, again, where the intent of this has been in the past to capture what's going on during the fiscal year and see what we got. And then the project schedule and the project spends, you know, that's, as you've acknowledged, John, it's a different level of complexity too, and visibility. I did want to ask the question, Director Bond, this has come up from a resident who said, where does our transportation benefit district funds, where do they go? They go straight into our street fund or the overlay. And the question is, where is that represented here? In terms of, because we're seeing people out there with tabs from 2019 and $50 or whatever the number is that we pay on our tabs. It's the only tax that goes straight into our streets. I think it's a valid question.
so it does go, the Transportation Benefit District Fund is its own fund. And that fund directly supports the asphalt overlay and the ADA ramps, so that $800,000 right there, that is what is being funded from the Transportation Benefit District.
The transportation capital revenue.
It does, so
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't want to get too complex here. Yes, the Transportation Benefit District Fund is directly paying for the overlay. In order to the expenditures, we transfer that money to the Transportation Capital Fund directly in order to complete that project, because it is a transportation capital project being completed and maintained for our city. That is more on the accounting side of trying to explain that, but it is going to show up in a capital fund because we are doing a capital improvement for the city. I'm not trying to make that sausage making, but if we are going that granular, that's the full walkthrough. The only thing that fund currently is supporting is the asphalt overlay and ADA ramp, and recently was committed to the public works debt. So the additional increases that were done in, I believe it's 23, 24, those of the increase of the tabs, in addition to the councilmanic sales tax, those, now that we have more solid numbers, those are going to be supporting that debt, which are then going to fund a capital transportation project.
Thank you, Director Bond. It's really important for the community to know that, because I think that people think that their taxes go up to some negative place. It's one of the few places that
Very
comes back
specific,
to us very specifically. So
very specific.
thank you for the description.
And Councilman Good has been very patient. Thank you.
Two things. One is Ashton is not as a presenter, so she can't raise a hand or speak. So I just wanted to let you know that. And I just had a question from before Mayor French made his comment about the budget. And I'm a little bit, you know, my experience with budgets is probably not as great as a lot of people, but I was thinking that having a total paid to date of, you know, showing, for example, in the capital of the total, for example, if you have a total budget and you're listing paid to date, and that's only the biennium, it would be good to have another column that shows the total paid to date, period. Am I understanding that right?
We can, that's, I believe what Budget Chair Lebo was requesting was to show that.
Okay, I'd take it offline after this. I just wanted to,
I
see
think
it.
it's the same,
Kind of question.
and kind of basically to show that full walkthrough on these bigger projects.
okay,
Versus the fiscal year impact or
Okay.
payment expenditure.
Okay.
If I am misunderstanding that intent, then we can definitely have an offline discussion.
sure. Okay, all right, thank you.
And just checking in, Councilmember McCartney, are you able
I think we
to?
lost her. It's not on. I don't.
Oh, no,
see-
I'm here.
Oh, where
You're
are you?
LFP, huh? Okay,
Yeah, I'm trying to trick you.
okay.
Just kidding. Thanks.
Okay.
Are you, did you phone in?
Yes, I was
Oh,
on
okay.
video and then the video kept cutting out, so now I'm just on phone.
There we go. We can't see in the list, that's why.
Oh, I see. I'm here. Thank you.
And I don't know about if you can raise a hand or not, but you could just say, hey, if you do have something, and I'll get to you, I promise.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that's the dashboard, and the next thing on our item is, you still?
Yep.
Are you gonna run with us?
I am.
Contract renewals.
Left my scissors home so we can run.
There you go.
So we've got several contracts that are gonna be coming before council, so I thought now is the time to get this before you. It's a good budget discussion. And so the first one is our municipal judge, Judge Grant. Her 4-year term is already expiring at the end of this year. And so we are recommending that the council mayor like to see her reappointed. And so we would like to extend her current contract another 4 years. The biggest change, and you see all these bullets, I'll just walk through it quickly, is currently she's contracted at 24 hours a week. As we brought these new cameras online, that's no longer enough, and so we need to up her FTE. And after about a month of discussion, I let her land where she thinks she needs to be, and that's a 0.75 FTE, so an increase of 0.15. And as you see on here, just under $35,000 a year increase. That will be directly charged to the 002 fund. The rest of her salary is to the 001 general fund. The change that you'll see in her contract, and we'll get to that on the next page, it's just gonna be an amendment to her contract, is that extra 0.15 FTE could either be her or her pro tem judges who take care of that work. She's not available in the week to do more than 24 hours. The reason we track her hours so closely is once you get 0.85 is 34 hours a week. 34 hours is the threshold. You go over 34 hours, it is now an elected position. I think to date, we've all been very pleased with the process we go by for selecting our judge. So something we want to keep an eye on as we move forward, because if we continue to put traffic cameras in place, work is going to ramp up, and we'll have to see how we address that in the future. So that's on the whole. On the next page, this is just a snippet out of Madrona Law Firm working with Rachel Turpin. This is the changes that will be proposed. This would just come as an amendment to her current contract. Just Article 1, changing the dates, extending till 2029. In paragraph 7, Article 3, you'll see the change to, and when necessary to accomplish the work of the court. This is for the judge pro tems, so that just gives her the extra ability to flex them into that position. And then paragraph 1, article 4 is just compensation, and that just changes it from 24 to 30 hours per week. So pretty straightforward on hers. Then I gave you a table on the front page, just breakdown to show you the numbers. These, I gave you the effective 2025 and 2026 numbers. July 1st is when her salary changes. This is set by the state. There's a commission that meets and sets that for judges and elected officials. We just pay on pro rata share for the hours that she works. Any questions on the judge? Okay.
Are we gonna be then tracking the traffic safety fund portion of her work as a percentage, or how are we
It'll
gonna
just be
track
the
that after
point, the
this
0.15 hours.
going
that's it.
forward?
Yep,
After
because
we-
that's the only addition. If additional hours are needed, is gonna be because of traffic safety.
Okay,
We haven't seen any additional work from speaking with her and our court administrator. They have seen some upticks in DUIs and things, but not substantial that is changing her work hours.
Councilmember Golden.
If Judge Grant sees the need to hire pro tem judges for increased traffic camera cases, would those pro tem judges be paid out of general fund or?
No, they would be paid out of the 002 fund. We already have a list of pro tem judges. Judge Portnoy is still one of our pro tem judges, and we have 2 others. I can't remember their names, but they've been on board for quite some time. She just makes the fault of that. For the most part, she will perform these duties. It's just if she's unable, she wants to be able to use the pro tems. And if she goes on vacation, we just need to be able to have that split between the types of work that they're doing while she's on vacation.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, moving on.
Okay, prosecuting attorney. This is Sarah Roberts. We've had a contract with Sarah for over 20 years. It has never been renegotiated. We spoke when I first got here, and she kind of let things go by the wayside. And so what you're seeing is a realization of the fact I liken this to our time with Bothell Dispatch. You're seeing the reality of cost increases. We have given her COLAs. We do allow her to take the same COLA as staff do over time. She's had to add staff, add technologies. There's inflation related to, office space, et cetera. So that first $3,200 a month increase, and this would be to the general fund, is just to cover current cost of attorney services for this type of work. The additional rate of $3,000 a month would be billed straight to the Traffic Safety 002 fund. And that is for the additional work that they've had to pick up for the traffic safety cameras. They've already hired an attorney. They've already hired what's the other? Paralegal, thank you. They likely will need more staff as time goes on. We do share, Sarah, with other municipalities. They've been kind of supporting what we've needed over time. Compared to what they pay, I think we're still doing a good deal. And this total annual increase is what I've reported to you before, 74,400. This is the number that we used. We're talking about budget challenges earlier in the year. Questions on Sarah? And the way I've got these targeted, I think that you'll see, we'll get to Jake Johnston, our federal public affairs, but he and Judge Grant, I think, are bringing November. We're still working out the details, and you won't be able to see these contracts with Sarah and our public defenders. So they'll probably be December before we get those to you, until before the end of the year for approval.
Okay, these are all effective the first of the year.
Correct.
No, it's chair, you were chair.
Oh.
It's chair, check with our friends on.
The call is good, and I haven't heard a beep beep from Ashton, so we're good.
Okay. Moving on to public defense, Stewart McNichols Harmel Incorporated. I went through this RFQ process. This is something that the courts cannot be involved in. We have conflict, so this is strictly done by the administration. We needed new public defense services, went out, and they were the successful firm. We had nothing but positive review from the courts, and our prosecuting attorney, other attorneys, and so we want to keep this in place. What you're seeing, this is a reflection of what is coming our way because of the new Supreme Court standards. And not so much that that full 2/3 increase is hitting us now. We're seeing it, that's spread out over next 10 years. So it's only an incremental increase next year, but what you're seeing is, and speaking with Ken Harmel, King County has such a need for public defenders that they're hiring everybody and they're paying. He was like, I don't know where they get all this money, but they have really raised the bar for what public defense attorneys in the region need to be paid. And so just to keep his people, keep his firm staffed up, that's reflected in this. And he's also looking at a per case fee instead of just a flat fee. It was always just $10,000 a month. I can tell you that was frustrating during COVID when I contacted them about maybe, giving us a break because we weren't holding court there for a while. That wasn't the case. So just for the ups and downs of court cases, as you see 2024, we did 217 cases. In 2025, we're on track for 224. So it's going to fluctuate. That's why I gave you an approximate $50,000 a year hit to the general fund. And just to keep this in perspective as we look at these, because they aggregate in public defense of 50,000 and another 38,000 to the general fund. On prosecuting, we're pushing another $100,000 to our general funds that we've got to absorb. So. Councilmember Goldman had asked me a question earlier today about public defense and conflict counsel. Conflict counsel is not wrapped up in this. Conflict counsel is a separate contract that we have, and he sees 15 to 20 cases per year where we have to call him in. But that is a separate contract that we have. We tried to get recently, just by way of information, tried to add some conflict counsel just in case he's out of town. We had zero response and we put that our queue up twice. So it's not something people like to do. It's hard to find that loan attorney who wants to do that work.
Are we anticipating seeing less cases taken on by defense attorneys in the next couple of years? Is that what we're sort of preparing for, or is this mostly just an adjustment to the reality of today?
I think for us right now, because we're lumped in with much larger cities that they have to staff up for, this is just an effect of what they're having to pay their attorneys. Other cities are much larger cities that we're in that with are going to start driving up the need. But I think within a few years, you can see the need start to dictate the price as well. And just for note, I don't think I put it on here. Oh yeah, I did. He's only willing to enter into a 1-year contract at this point, just given the uncertainty of the future. So he wants to negotiate this on an annual basis until we see where all the cards fall.
Thank you. Councilmember Choi, you've got your hand up.
Yes, my question is, this says rate is changing from a flat fee to a per case of 750. What was the flat fee?
The flat
prior?
fee was $10,000 a month. So
Oh, okay.
$100,000 a year. And if I remember right, this is about $168,000.
Okay.
24 times 750.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yep.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments or questions? One more, it looks like.
One more. Oh, there are more coming, but this
One
is
more
all-
in this pack.
Yeah. Others propped up today. Federal government affairs. So Jake Johnston, the Johnston Group. We do a 2-year cycle on his contracts. His is coming to the end of this year. He is proposing that his fees remain unchanged for a 3rd cycle, so for 6 years. I spoke to him about how wise that is from a business standpoint, and he really wants to deliver something to the city before he talks about raising his rates. He says, yes, I'm not charging you market rates, but I feel that we've hit so many hurdles, so many roadblocks with funding that he really wants to deliver something. You'll remember that currently we have $2 million in a bipartisan bill at the federal level for the community center. that probably isn't gonna come through at this rate. But he just wants to deliver. I listed, oh, just quickly, surface water utility and transportation fund or what support his contract with, that's the type of work that he does for us. And then the 10-year history, just quickly, small and medium-sized cities set aside for transportation projects, that's at 200,000 population and less. Before there was no limit, so you competed with Seattle at almost 800,000 people, much larger community, Chicago. So that was good, and actually after that went into place, 2 cities within the state of Washington under 200,000 for the first time got funding through the RAISE grant. So while we haven't had a project to submit to RAISE grant yet, that is benefiting the state. We were leads on that whole effort, so. And then we have the Joint Army Corps project, City of Shoreline, right? He secured that funding for the study between us and Shoreline and the Army Corps. He will be part of the discussion as we move forward into actual design. This is more of a pre-design, actual design and construction of that. If you remember, that's a 78-year project just because the Army Corps is involved. So, and I already talked about the $2 million funding. So, any question on Jake's? I plan on everybody being either in person or online to answer any questions, present to council when they come before you.
I do not have any questions, my colleagues. Okay. Well, that brings us to the public comment section of the meeting today. And I will open by stating that state law RCW 4217A 555 does not allow the use of public facilities to promote or oppose ballot measures. Promoting or opposing the city's levy lift ballot measure during a council meeting would be a use of public facility in violation of state law. This includes comments made during the public comment section of a council meeting. The statute, however, does not limit your ability to support or oppose a ballot measure on your own time using your own resources. Additionally, the council will not be accepting online public comments. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the council on agenda items or any other topic the council might have purview or control over. However, the mayor or council may not respond to comments from the public. If the comments are of a nature that the council does not have influence or control over, then the mayor or presiding officer may request the speaker to suspend their comments. The council may direct staff to follow up on items brought up by the public, and comments are limited to a 3-minute time limit. I do not see any public in the room today, so we've got that read into the record and we're all good. It is the end of our agenda at this time. Any comments before we adjourn?
The introduction to public comments takes more than 3 minutes.
It does.
Yes.
I was actually, maybe I should time myself. I may be in violation of my own public comment. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. We are adjourning at 6:44. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks. Good night, guys.